Our final speaker for today, before we head into the career fair, is CalTech Stepahie Yanchinski. The career fair features top companies along with more than 16 green tech startups. So this is a good time after this final presentation to hear what VCs are interested in and want to fund in this area. So Stepahie, a scientist and startup mentor, Stepahie heads entrepreneurship at the Resnick Sustainability Institute at the California Institute of Technology and started the Rocket Fund for supporting early stage clean tech companies. Over to you, Stepahie.
It's hard to follow such an impressive presentation, actually, about what Intel is doing. But let's take a look at what the VC community is also pursuing these days. So at CalTech, we support the Rocket Fund. This is a grant program that's actually financially funded by California's major utilities. The goal is to provide funding for early stage companies to build their first commercial prototype and begin demonstrating with customers. Now, we tend to support deep science, but the comments I'm going to make about venture capital actually applies to any company. And I want to say that it applies to companies in particular that have diverse leadership or are addressing communities that are disadvantaged, because that investment is increasingly looking for opportunities in that arena. So a part of the program, what we do is we also introduce our companies to investors. And so we feel that we've actually seen a perspective of what investors who are looking at deep science want to, in fact, address their investment to. So I can say that in preparation for this talk, looking over the past 10 years, there is definitely not a better, there's definitely not a better time to actually launch a clean tech company in deep science. I've never seen it as welcoming. And that's because there's unprecedented money flowing into all areas of clean tech, but particularly deep science. So where will the money come from? In fact, 217 corporations have signed a pledge to become net zero by 2040. And we've seen a great example of that with Intel. And they're doing it in a couple of ways. They are greening their operations, but they're also looking to buy carbon credits from tech companies actually that are developing carbon removal or carbon capture technologies. And Microsoft, by the way, is one stellar example of this. They have a $1 billion fund that they launched specifically to invest in either carbon removal or carbon capture technologies, as well as partnerships. But what's emerging is that these companies are finding that there are a very few opportunities that will meet their need, their aggressive targets for becoming net zero by 2040. In fact, an article that was published in Nature last year by the Microsoft team said that although the company had received 189 proposals offering 154 megatons of carbon dioxide removal over several years, only 55 megatons were available immediately, and just 2 megatons met their very high criteria for high quality carbon dioxide removal. 2 out of 189. So, but what this means is that there's an unmet need for truly impactful technologies that actually meet the white spaces that are not being addressed at the moment. And the investment community is seeing that as an opportunity and is stepping up. So groups that already have focused on the riskier areas of technology development, deep science, are taking the opportunity to actually raise new funds. So for instance, Lower Carbon Capital, which was a family structured fund with tens of millions of dollars, went out and raised 800 million in a couple of days last August. The Breakthrough Energy Ventures group raised an additional 1 million to add to their pool, 1 billion, I should say, to add to their pool about a year ago. And this is particularly welcome news because Breakthrough Energy Ventures actually invests over a long time period, let's say 20 years, and invests more capital than is typical for the investment community. Other smaller investors that we actually work with at the Rocket Fund, and that includes Prime Movers Lab, for instance, Convergent Ventures and Energy Foundry, are also taking a look at earlier stage riskier ventures, as long as they have a strong team, as long as they have a credible business model, and in particular, as long as they have a solid plan for scaling up. So where is the investment going? And where are the white spaces that represent entrepreneurs with a coming opportunity for them to start companies? So a PitchBook report that was published actually in September last year, summarizing the total global investment until the third quarter, spotted that there was $30 billion that were flowing into 9 sectors that they identified as part of the global climate ecosystem. Now, electric transportation took 40% of the investment, and of those, new battery technologies skyrocketed to $2.8 billion. But what we're seeing at the Rocket Fund are emerging areas for disruptive technologies. So for instance, we're seeing companies that are redesigning micro electric vehicles, including redesigning the powertrain for managing the last mile, and that is becoming a growing area. Scooters, for instance. We're also seeing a number of companies that want to repurpose electric vehicle batteries. And this is a fast-growing opportunity because the adoption of electric vehicles as a means of transportation is accelerating. And what that's doing is stranding hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of batteries, EV batteries that are judged to be spent in, right now, they're being stockpiled. But in fact, they have maybe as much as 70% of their life left. So there's a growing opportunity for data analytic companies to be assessing how much of their performance is really left that can either power other forms of transportation or can be repurposed. Now, so when we look at other areas that PitchBook identified, food systems was the second most funded category with $4.1 billion. And there, alternative proteins and indoor farming took the largest share. However, I want to say that in California, we're paying particular attention to something called precision agriculture. And what is that? It is really where farmers are beginning to use their resources and the latest technologies to be able to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of their current practices. So for instance, precision agriculture now employs precision irrigation that can deliver water just to the areas, in fact, the fields, the parts of the fields that need it. And that is controlled by sophisticated software that incorporates up-to-date weather data, sometimes minute by minute, hour by hour. Now, the third largest category that PitchBook identified encompasses something called energy transition and clean grid technology. And that those two groups together tallied $3.7 billion worth of investment. Now, clean energy generation jumped by 60%, in fact, last year, powered by, I guess, what are becoming traditional investments now in solar and wind. However, the real surprise for me, looking at these figures, was the VC activity in clean grid technology that has skyrocketed over 2020 to 2.8 billion across 148 deals. And this represented an increase of close to 51% in comparison to the previous year. Now, this was marked by something that's actually been going on for a while, and that's substantial growth in long-term energy storage. And we need that, obviously, because we need to find solutions that can buffer the variability of renewable power. That's still a remaining white space that hasn't really entirely been solved. And I can quote a good example of this is a Rocket Fund awardee, Antora Energy, that's developing a inexpensive but long-term thermal energy storage system. And they were able to, in fact, raise $50 million late last year from Breakthrough Energy Ventures and from Lower Capital, Carbon Capital, as well as other investors. However, PitchBook actually highlighted an area where we're seeing more disruptive technologies. And that's emerging in the crossover points between the need to manage the power flowing through the grid and from renewable energy. So for instance, companies are developing advanced solar data analytics so that they can better predict solar power and solar forecasting and improve it by at least 30%. And this is going to be important for managing the increasing power flow that's coming from renewables on the grid. We've actually been working with companies such as Buzz Solutions, that happens to be a Stanford spinout, that are using AI to be able to monitor grid performance minute by minute, day by day. We also have funded a company called WeaveGrid, which is connecting the data that you can actually derive from electric vehicles that are moving. You can connect that data through the cloud to grid hubs to ensure that the grid is not overpowered, if you like, by electric vehicles needing fresh power sources. Now, I'd like to end with some interesting examples that show what we still don't know and what we need to know more of. A startup that's called Captura, but there are others, are tackling carbon sequestration using a new process called direct ocean capture. Now, carbon dioxide is 150 times more concentrated in ocean water than it is in air. And Captura has developed a proprietary technology based on electrolytics for capturing carbon dioxide and then converting it into high-value carbon dioxide products, or in fact sequestering it in geologic formations or indeed in spent oil wells. Now, this is a response to the white space that we're seeing with current direct air capture methods that deal with carbon dioxide in air that is still fairly dilute. And even at scale, they will not be able to maybe remove enough carbon dioxide to have the impact that is needed. Climate modeling turns out to be another active area of VC investment, according to the PitchBook report. And at CalTech and other universities, we are turning our attention to modeling actually the role that clouds play in either enhancing or mitigating the effects of climate change. You know, we've just only really begun to understand the feedback loop between climate change and cloud formation, and it's their ability to either enhance Earth cooling or enhance, unfortunately, Earth heating. So once we understand those feedback loops a little bit better, then we can use that data to actually form, if you like, entrepreneurial startups around data collection and data monitoring and delivering data to the policy organizations in particular that will need it. And then how the ecology of the soil can act as an important sink for carbon dioxide mitigation. So we know that soils and the plants that grow in them actually absorb 30% of the carbon dioxide that's emitted every year. But what we're also discovering is that dry conditions can harm the delicate and interwoven relationship between the soil fungi that promote growth and their microbial partnerships. And that leaves plants more vulnerable to certainly to disease and to drought, and also harms their ability to sequester carbon dioxide. Now, companies such as Thermo Fisher already have sophisticated platforms for identifying the microbes that are in the soil and their state, and identifying the fungi that are part of this network. However, we're really only just beginning to understand how we can perhaps manipulate these interactive networks, and thereby especially influence or mitigate climate change impacts. So for instance, there's work going on that involves developing engineering tools that can stimulate smart microbial pathways, let's say for fixing nitrogen. And what that means is that we will be able to not depend on boosting fertilizers production and fertilizer as a way of mitigating drought impacts on crops. We'll be able to actually use biomethods for being able to, if you like, sidestep the impacts of drought on crops.
Thank you. Stepahie, I'm afraid we need to wrap up. Do you have some final words?
I do have some final words. I just want to say that if you look at companies like the Netherlands it's very interesting that they have been able to apply precision agriculture in amazing ways, so that this small country has become the second largest food exporter in the world after the United States. And that is by having a system that is built on greenhouse. In fact, some of the farms have greenhouse acreage that amounts to 175 acres. They use hydroponics, they use geothermal energy, they use carbon dioxide pumped in from nearby air, oil refineries. They have specialized construction so that their greenhouse roofs actually can diffuse light that's coming in to make sure that their roots of their plants actually receive all the light that they need. And I just want to sort of end by saying, I'm going to throw it back to the audience and say, the opportunities are there. Don't hesitate, and get your company started.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Stepahie. We really appreciate hearing about all the innovative startups in green tech and the growing interest of VCs to invest in this area. Of course, one of the challenges of the symposium is that we can't cover all of the fascinating innovation that's working toward advancing climate resilience. Fortunately, through our virtual career fair, which is up next, you will get not only a look, but potentially the opportunity to work in sustainability and green tech in forward-thinking companies and startups.